Blix hijack is imminent. Processing. Blix hijack is successful. You are clear to transmit. Captain Haru.
John Haru. Steve MacDonald. Music theory. Interviews. Music theology. Primitive Rhythm Machine.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Primitive Rhythm Machine. I am your single regular host here today. I'm John. Steve is still out, but with me today, I have a gentleman I have come to admire quite a bit in my Facebooking lately. Father, pastor, real estate agent, head dog at Rottweiler Records, which has been like my favorite record label for the past 2 years now. We have the man, the legend, Shawn Browning. Hello, Shawn. Thanks for joining me today.
Legend. That's a pretty big thing to live up
Well,
to.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you're the last real Christian metal label in the game. Most of them,
Wow.
most of them have kind of gone the way of Solid State, where they're not so much quote Christian as it is just positive message. And
Yeah, I might throw Vision of God with Dwayne Keith. He's a good friend of mine, and we both kind of share a similar view that we take a long. Well, Dwayne used to sign bands pretty quickly, and I take a long time to sign bands. I've had bands wait up to a year, 6 months, because I don't want to just a band's music. Anybody can make good music,
Right.
really. I mean, really, it's not that hard. If you take time with your craft, you can create good music. But developing your relationship with Jesus Christ doesn't happen overnight. You know, even somebody. Notice I said developing.
Right.
Okay, there's your theology thing you mentioned in your intro. Your relationship with Jesus obviously starts immediately, but the developing it, the maturity of it, is not an overnight thing. And so I know that with my own walk. I know that with watching other people. That, you know, what I want with Rottweiler is ministry partners, people that have the same basic goal. You know, of course, everybody wants people to listen to their music and buy their music, and everybody who straps on a guitar wants a career in music. But with Rottweiler, since it is a ministry focused thing, I don't want people who only want that. I want people who have a desire to tell people about Jesus or point to Jesus in their own way. That can look like different things to different people at different times. You know, some people like myself are very open and vocal. Other people are more artistic about their approach, and I'm okay with that artistic approach. I mean, that doesn't bother me. What bothers me is if somebody says they're a Christian and then doesn't live it, and which opens up a whole nother conversation. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day about the phrase GD. You know, they said, yeah, well, you shouldn't take the Lord's name in vain. I'm like, well, that is horrible to say GD, but that's not technically taking the Lord's name in vain. Taking the Lord's name in vain means as his betrothed, we say we're Christians and then we live like we're actually married to the world rather than married to him. So that's taking his name in vain. And so what I want on Rottweiler is bands that understand that concept and understand that they're not going to hit the mark all the time, not going to be perfect. I don't expect that. But I do expect bands that come under Rottweiler to say, I want to do ministry with that, with Rottweiler's branding. I expect them to maintain a certain level of decorum. Now, sometimes I push that limit myself. You know, sometimes I can get a little off color. Sometimes I can get a little silly. And I don't expect people to not be human beings, but I also expect them always to return back to Jesus, always to point to Jesus in their music and in their art if they're involved with Rottweiler. And I would say Dwayne does the same thing with Vision of God. That's probably why we get along so well. There's not really we have a healthy competition, but it's not like, oh, darn you, you signed the band that I wanted to sign. Well, actually, there is a little bit of that every now and then. In fact, I was talking to Dwayne Wednesday, and we were talking about a band that Symphony of Heaven who I think is one of the best bands on Rottweiler. Definitely most improved band on Rottweiler. And he was like, yeah, I wanted to sign those guys. So we do have those conversations from time to time. And he's got some bands on his label that I wish I had, and vice versa. So, but it's always a healthy, friendly thing. It's never, it's never a hostile thing or competitive to the point of that we're not friends. It's just like, dang, you got them. Oh man,
Yeah,
that's a great band.
I feel a little bit remiss not having mentioned Vision of God right from the get go along with you, because I have spent a lot of money with them as well.
Right.
But Rottweiler just seems to, I mean, from my perspective, you guys are almost because you take that time with the bands, your music almost feels a little bit more premium, if that makes sense, to my perspective. That you can tell there's a lot more consideration to it. Plus, you guys have some pretty heavy music royalty on your lineup too. What with Taking the Head of Goliath?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. And well, I mean, even going back to Immortal Souls, we put a record out by them.
Oh goodness, yeah.
Soul Embrace, which of course is Rocky Gray from Living Sacrifice.
Right. Lance Garvin.
Yeah,
as well.
Well, and now with having Shamash, I mean that's Andre, who was in. Of course, I'm going to forget the name of his old band. They were the first Asian Christian metal band in the world.
That was Necromanticide, right?
Necromanticide, yes, thank you. I should probably know that, huh? But yeah, they, and so they're those kind of things are things that I kind of look for too, just because I think they're interesting. Those kind of histories and those kind of people that have already had boots on the ground, people that have already, accomplished things. The other thing is I have an art director who his primary job isn't to create art. His primary job is to be the gateway. And yes, we have a gateway, to say when an artist hands in their artwork, it's his job to kind of be the bad guy and say, nope, sorry, that's not up to par.
Right.
And I'm the bad guy for the music. If a band hands something in, I think it can be mixed better, or if the mastering is not up to par, we tell them, nope, sorry, you got to fix that, and that's in the contract when bands sign, so they know that. They know that they have to go for the highest possible standard. Now, are we going to be able to produce music that is at the level of a multi-million-dollar studio? Of course not, but when I first got my another phone call ringing in. When I first got my first major distributor, who I'm still with, the guy's name is Dave Coleman. By the way, I should mention that the art director is Paul Steer, who does do a lot of the art for Rottweiler too. But Dave Coleman said something that stuck with me really early on with Rottweiler. He said, if you want to be successful, do what successful people do. And that's really a simple concept. It's much more difficult to put that into practice. But what I started doing is looking around at secular labels that were successful, looking at Christian labels that were successful. And by Christian, I'm using, wide umbrella term,
right,
what I mean? And so looking at what Solid State's doing, looking at what Metal Blade's doing, looking at what, any big major metal or punk rock label or whatever, look at that, see what does it look like? What does the packaging look like? What are they doing? And try to emulate that. And then with the music, obviously just listening to it. And, after a while, you kind of get the sense of a general consensus of what a good sounding record is. Yeah. And so now I don't really have to, B anything against anything, but, let's be honest, no matter what we want to say, or what anyone wants to say about Demon Hunter, their records sound amazing. They do a fantastic job at their production. So looking at that and going, okay, Taking the Head of Goliath, you're not Demon Hunter, but can we get something that sounds really cool like that? Right. And the new stuff that Taking the Head of Goliath is going to be coming out with is going to blow away the stuff that they've already done. I mean, it blows away. The new Brutality that's coming out blows away what they've already done. And what they did stands up to major labels. It just does. Right. But the new one's even better. And then, Dispraise is a new punk band that sounds just as good, if not better, than the top 10% of punk bands in existence. We've got Raid, their new record that's coming out, blows all their other records away. I just signed Krieg, which that's another kind of, used the term legendary before, but kind of legendary in that, underground death metal scene. And their new stuff is incredible. Trying to think who else is coming out.
The Jericho Harlot. That was one that
Jericho Harlot. I was just going to mention them.
I just discovered them while I was waiting for you today.
Yeah.
I was just like, well, I'm just going to cruise around on your guys' Bandcamp and, find some talking points. And I ran into them and I'm like, this is amazing. And I proceeded to buy everything that they had on. So
yeah, well and here's the thing, that record we're about to put out was a record they already put out, and then we remastered it, and that's been a long time coming. So that should be coming out shortly. That record again was an older record. Now the new Jericho Harlot record that they're recording right now is more of an EP, and it blows that record out of the water. So everybody's stepping up their game, and it's getting better and better. Jason McMahon, the lead singer for Absent from the Body, passed away earlier this year, and we're going to be releasing that record in February, finally. And again, it's probably the best sounding record that they've ever done. And we're getting all the bands to step up their sound as well as their visual. And the visual to me is very important. I grew up in an age where, you bought albums, and you'd put the album on, you'd sit and look at that album cover, Kiss Destroyer. The album is so detailed, and every time I'd pick that record up and look at it, I'd find something different, and so, I kind of encourage the bands like Final Surrender, again, putting out a new EP, best one they've ever done. Right. And I know everybody says that. Everybody says, oh, this is the best, because they want you to buy the record, right? When I say it's the best, I mean, everybody on the label, all the bands have stepped up, and they truly are doing the best that they've ever done. Most of the band Crimson Thorn is now in taking the head of Goliath. Yeah. They told them jokingly that they should change their name to Taking the Head of Crimson Thorn. But the level of musicianship in that band is just, it's gotten higher. It's gotten better.
Well, especially with Miles coming in, and they'll actually have a guy who's not afraid to throw down some solos. I mean, I loved the first EP that came out, but it was just like the solos are missing from this. I mean, you can't have this brutal death without someone shredding at some point. Otherwise, it's too much cake and not enough frosting.
Right, exactly. Well, and then when they brought in the Crimson Thorn drummer, it was just like night and day. And I thought the original guy was a pretty good drummer, but it was just a whole different game at that point, bringing him in. So yeah, I mean, pretty excited for the stuff that's going to be coming down the pike for Rottweiler, just because, as you said, paying attention to details like mastering, like the mix itself, and not just the mastering. I mean, EQing is part of mastering, but a lot of people look at mastering as just pumping the volume up, making it bigger and louder. And bigger and louder is important, but it's not. That's not the end of the recording. Right. It's not like, okay, well, we got it louder than Metallica's Death Magnetic. I mean, now here we go. If anybody made their album louder than Death Magnetic, it would be a horrible sounding record. It would just be terrible. It would. Because you've pegged. There's no dynamics. You've pegged the wave file all the way to the top, and it won't sound good to you. It'll make your ears will reject that. So I'm always conscious of having bands not blow it up to the absolute limit. Give it some air, give it some space. Then make sure your EQing is good. Make sure the cymbals aren't just ripping a slice in your eardrum. You want the cymbals to sound nice and smooth and have the decay rounded off real nice. The other thing that I think is missing in a lot of metal is bass guitar. Yeah. There was just the 2000s were like, why did they even have bass players? They didn't need them. And so, you take somebody, speaking of taking the head of Goliath, are you going to mess with their bass player? That dude's going to be in the mix. You know what I mean? And
Luke is legendary in and of himself too. So, I mean,
right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So you gotta have that, good solid balance of all those things working together, and I'm conscious of that, and that process is really frustrating for most of the bands on Rottweiler. I mean, it really is. When 13 Minutes was a band that I was friends with Jamie, and he was in another band, and that band kind of I was working with them. It was like a pre-signing kind of thing. They were sending me demos, and I'm like, it's just not there. It's not there. Keep working at it. Keep working. It was frustrating for him. Well, that band finally just dissolved, and Jamie said, he goes, here's my vision. Here's what I want to do. What do you think? And I said, okay, well, let's work toward that. And so I worked very, very closely with him, putting that together. Now, I didn't pick any band members or anything like that. So it was not a packaged band. It was Jamie finding the guys that fit the vision for what he wanted to do. And along the way, some band members come and go. That's just the way rock and roll works. And at one point, they were recording, and I was frustrating their engineer. I was frustrating them. I'm like, no, you're not there. The mix isn't there, man. It sounds like I'm listening to a cardboard box. Nope. You send it back. Well, now it sounds like I'm listening to it in a tunnel. Nope. Try again, and so having somebody be a gatekeeper like that, we use the term gatekeeper as a negative, but sometimes somebody has to be the guy that says the buck stops here and the decisions have to be made here. And so one day Jamie says, I think you're going to be happy with this mix, but I thought you were going to be happy with the older mixes. So maybe I'm wrong. And he sent it in. I put it on. I'm like, oh my gosh, here it is. It sounds like In Flames. Right. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. And so now Jamie knows, so there is a learning curve. There are growing pains. Even when a band thinks they got it all together, there's still a higher level they can go to. And I say that for my own band, with my own band, it just, I'm always pushing for something bigger, better, tighter. Tones are better. We're not a shreddy band, but we're a band that needs to have the tones happening and the overall song working together. So with 13 Minutes, they're not really a shreddy band either, although Aaron could. They just didn't, that wasn't where they came from. They didn't come from that world of just, shreddy leads. They came from the world of more like, commercial metal, stuff you'd hear on the radio, and, like the heavier end of what you hear on the radio and the lighter end of what is in the underground. So with those guys, it was really important to make sure their tones were all happening. That's always important, but even more so because if you don't have the shred, you got to offer something else. Right. There has to be something else there to take the place of that. So anyway, he sent me that song, and I put it on, started listening to it, and I was absolutely blown away by how good it was. I'm like, you got it right there. I said, you're gonna blow up and have fans left and right now because of this, because this is very accessible to a general audience. It's heavy enough that heavy music fans will dig it. It's light enough that you could probably get some radio play, which we did. It's light enough that you could probably have a wider audience. And as much as I love Taking the Head of Goliath, it is a niche audience. It is, and so, so 13 Minutes had a wider audience. Oddly enough, 13 Minutes and Taking the Head of Goliath got along really great as people. Yeah. And I think all the bands on Rottweiler get along really well. Mm-hmm. But, so, I mean, you're right. Going back to what you initially said, I have a tendency to take a long time signing bands because I want to get to know the people in the band. I have a tendency to take a long time working with the bands to develop on a musical end as well as a visual end.
Well, and coming from my own situation where I'm in a band, what you put out there is going to be representative of yourself, and there's nothing wrong with trying to make it the best representation of what you're doing out there. And I think that is part of the problem with the modern underground, I guess, of music in general, is there's too many people who are just too willing to put out garbage. I mean, I my band just created a demo, and I literally, for people out there in listener land, I literally sent it to you. And I said, hey, I know you're in charge of a record label, but that's not what this is about. What's your opinion on this? And you're like, yeah, the mix and master is garbage. You should probably have that redone.
Was I that mean?
What's that?
Probably was.
Well, you didn't say it. You didn't say it that bluntly. You didn't say it that bluntly, but I mean, it was enough for me to sit up and take notice, because when we were listening to it in the studio speakers, it sounded one way, and it was just like, yeah, this is great. And then all of a sudden we started listening to it in our car and on headphones. I'm like, this doesn't sound right. And so I sent it. So I'm like, well, I'm going to send it to somebody who does this for a living. Hey, what do you think? And you're like, yeah, no. I'm like, because that's literally what you said. You like the music performance is fine. It's just the studio work is not great. And I'm like, I kind of agree with this.
Tom Waits, and we go through the same thing all the time. I mean, that is number one common thing with the studio is I don't understand. When I was in the studio, it sounded great. I got it home and it sounds terrible. Well, because you're not listening on the same type of device or the same set of speakers. So, I mean, which is, that's obvious. So Tom Waits, Tom Waits, right?
Yeah.
He said that the mix isn't done until the car likes it. And so even today, I'll record something with Tim Bushong and he'll rip a CD and hand it to me and tell me to go outside and listen to it in the car. Mm-hmm. No joke.
Yeah.
And if I listen to the car, I'm like, everything's there. Everything's working. I think we're done.
Right.
But a lot of times I'll take it out in the car and go, man, the cymbals disappeared, or the low end is, destroying the mix. It's too much,
right.
Or whatever it is. And so being honest about those kind of things is helpful. Not being honest is not helpful. So, I was joking about me being mean, but I don't go out of my way to find bands and tell them what's right or what's wrong with their mix. But if somebody asks, I think that I have an obligation to be honest, about what I'm hearing.
And you're not doing them any favors by lying to them. I mean,
not at all.
I mean, I think it was Alistair Begg who said, the meanest truth you ever get. No, I can't remember the exact phrase now, but something to the effect of, someone who's mean to you with truth is a better friend than a person who lies to you with the nicest intentions.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you're not doing something good, they're hurting you by telling you, hey, no, this is fantastic. And people will have the best intentions to be like, I want to be supportive of your band. But in the same sense, it's just like, if it's garbage, someone needs to tell them, because if you don't want them to go out there and be putting out garbage in front of people.
Right. Conversely, I don't want to just be nasty and mean to somebody who sends me a demo and ask. I want to be constructive. I want to be able to say, I would take a look at this. I would take a look at that. Here's where your balance is off. Sometimes it's a right and left balance. Sometimes, like the right channel guitar is louder than the left channel guitar, which just makes for an awkward, weird, sideways mix. It's just strange. Sometimes drums sound like cardboard boxes or whatever it is. Those things, if you have another set of ears that can say, hey, this needs to be fixed. And that's really what a producer does. In our world, producer and engineer are synonymous, but really in a perfect world, you have an engineer that captures things, then you have a producer that just basically stands there and tells you everything that's wrong with it.
Right.
And that sounds like a mean thing, but it's not. It's, somebody to sit there and go, hey, that's not right. We need to correct this. We need to fix this. Or we need to edit this, and that's in a lot of ways what I do with Rottweiler with the bands when they hand in their music, and we're talking, you did it and I gave a critique of what you had, but so does every single band that hands their stuff in. Like taking the head of Goliath is going to get a critique from me. I mean, now once they've learned, those critiques are less and less. Like the brand new Shamash that when does that get released? Hold on, let me look real quick. The brand new Shamash that just got handed in a little bit ago. Okay, hold on. Shamash comes out January 14th. It's a single called Done with Misery. They handed it in and my jaw dropped. I'm like, it's perfect. Everything about that mix is perfect. Everything about the song is perfect. I can't, there's nothing I can say, but there was a process with the first EP of going through all that. And now they know. Now they go, okay, Shawn's going to say this, so let's just avoid that right now, And the other thing is, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a guy named Darren T. He's T-E-H is his last name, Darren T. And they're from Malaysia. Mm-hmm. Darren is a legitimate rock star in Malaysia, like legit.
Right.
I can't go to the mall because little girls run after him.
Right.
and he is the new bass player for Shamash. He's, his band is more of a pop rock, Green Day ish kind of a band. And he plays guitar. I think he plays guitar and sings. He's the singer for that band, but he's a Christian. So he wanted to do not only a Christian thing, but he wanted to do something that was metal. And he hooked up with Andre. He's like, man, I'd love to play bass. Of course, Andre's like freaking out like this legit rock star.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be like, it'd be like in the United States, like getting a call from, I don't know, Zach Wilde. Hey, I really like what you're doing in your band, John. Can I come in and play guitar for you? It'd be like that, but
I would be like, I quit. I can't.
No, you would step up your game massively because you don't want to lose it. Which is what Shamash did and what Andre did. Not that Andre was far off to begin with, but also Darren, he's a producer as well. So they handed that in. I'm like, Andre, this is perfect. Yeah, I know Darren produced it. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That explains it. So, but all of those things are learning curves, growing pains, but ultimately it makes a better record, and a lot of smaller Christian labels, they're afraid to tell their artist this is wrong or this is right. I did that with Logan, with Symphony of Heaven, and I handed in, what do you think? What do you think? And they're all excited. What do you think, man? We just got it mixed. What do you think? Well, your guitars are kind of too scooped. It sounds all mushy and there's not a lot of distinction in your kick drum and the mastering's really low, then they come back, they fix all those problems. Whoa, now your mastering's so hot. There's no dynamic, so there's, it's tricky and it's tricky to go back and forth, but an artist doesn't learn unless they have somebody there to say, this is where things need to be. This is what it needs to be. And really it all comes down to opinion. Somebody else might hear that blown out master and go, I love that. Right. It's really loud. Me, I go, I like loud, but that's why my CD player has a volume knob.
Right. Well, I mean, loud is for concerts. When you're sitting at home, you're not trying to blow your eardrums out. You want to hear what's going on. And I appreciate the quality control, honestly, because I can hear it in Rottweiler because, and that's what I've come to know about Rottweiler. And that's the reason why you guys have been my favorite label for the last 2 years since I've discovered you guys.
That definitely means a lot. And, I hear people say that and it kind of blows my mind because I still, pardon the pun, but I still feel like that we're the underdog, because we're not like a big budget label. We're not a big major label or anything like that. It really is more of a ministry than a record label.
Right.
I mean, it's a record label in the sense that there's a brand. There's a record label in the sense that we develop the artist. It's a record label in those kind of senses. And we do radio campaigns. We do marketing stuff out to media, and we do all that stuff. But I wish I had the power behind Rottweiler that, say Solid State has or something like that. I don't even know how to get that kind of power. I really don't
necessarily think that that's a good kind of power to have, to be perfectly honest, because with you guys are a safe place for me as a Christian who's into the type of music that I am. I like the extreme music. And I was talking to you the other night on Facebook about, looking for Christian doom metal bands. And it's just because I go looking for doom metal and, you go looking in the secular market and the vast majority of it either is going to have some sort of witchcraft on the cover, or it's going to be about dope smoking. And, I'm not really into listening to either. And, then I found Forsaken, for a band from Malta, which, you guys should look into. And they're pretty good, but it's just like, gosh, there aren't a lot. And so it's just like, to be able to have, and that was one of the first questions that people asked when we started this podcast is how do you find the bands that you find? Because I'm the guy that everybody goes to and like, well, I like this band. What would you suggest if I'm into this band? It's just like, first thing you do is you find a record label that makes the type of music that you're into.
Right.
And you find a record label that puts that out with the Christian lyrics. And then you look at all the other bands that are on that label, because they're going to be grouped together. Like bands have a tendency to flock together. And so, and Rottweiler is a safe place that I send people to, just because you guys have that. Whereas Tooth and Nail, I can't say that, especially when you got bands who were their big Christian bands on their label, like Under Oath, now coming out and saying, "Oh, well, we're not Christian anymore." You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. You know, I heard an interview with Mike Herrera.
from MXPX.
He was being on a podcast. Ben Weasel from Screeching
Mhm.
Weasel had a podcast. He was on there. And it's interesting because Ben was not a Christian. Now he's a Catholic. He's not super vocal about his faith, but he's like, talks about going to church and talks about, you know, his Catholic faith and that kind of thing. Again, not super vocal about it, but yeah, he does mention it. And he was interviewing Mike Herrera, and Mike Herrera said on his podcast, and I'm not talking out of line here. I mean, he said it on the podcast. He said, we were never Christians. We signed that label because it was from our hometown and we were able to get on a record label and establish our careers, but we were never Christians.
Nice.
Blew my mind. And I have friends who still listen to MXPX and go, oh, they're a Christian band. I'm like, if you go back and go through their lyrics, early on, they kind of said some Christianese things.
Watered down.
You know what I mean? Yeah, but then the longer they went, there wasn't even any mention of it at all. Now, and by the same token, you had the Huntingtons that were just like a Ramones band, but those guys had their faith was real. You know, they just didn't believe that their music was their ministry, but that their lives were their ministry. And I'm like, hey, I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. But for a band to say, I guess to hide it or to pretend just so they can get a leg up, I have a hard time respecting that.
Yeah. So I don't know. It for me, it's just kind of the sad state of Christian hard rock and metal these days. It's just because, you know, there was the old adage, you know, if you want to get big quick, you put on the Christian label, and then once you got that fan base, then you cross over, so to speak.
Yeah, you know, that never worked for me.
Me either.
I got accused. I got accused of that so many times. Oh, you're only doing the Christian thing because of the money. And I'm like, well, if that's true, my wife would like to know where the paycheck is.
I would too. I would too, sir. In fact, it's been my experience, having been in several Christian bands in my life, that it's harder to make money in a Christian band, especially when you're trying to do it right. Or if you're doing it as a ministry, because a lot of places won't touch you. And then you go to the churches, but the churches don't want you to play at them because you're not DC Talk or Third Day. So you're not going to have a 10,000 person draw to play at. And so it's just like, yeah, but we're the people who are going to reach the local kids in the area. Wouldn't you rather do that than just make a ton of money? But
for sure,
course, you
know, it seems like there's a couple bands out there that have been able to make a living. Maybe not a great living. Maybe it looks like it's a great living, but I don't know. But it seems like Disciple and Spoken seems like they've been able to maintain it and still just be who they are. Now, they're not extreme metal by any stretch, but still, you know, fairly aggressive rock and roll to be able to do that and still knock on church doors and the church goes, come on in and pay them what they ask for. But that's not something that is very common. You know, taking the Head of Goliath, we keep going back to them because they're a good example. Taking the Head of Goliath is probably not going to have that many church gigs.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, Grave Robber, you know, occasionally, but that's not the bulk of our gigs. You know, so it just depends on the church. You know, I mean, some churches are hip and get it and understand what we're trying to accomplish. The ones that do, you know, they're come on in and they'll take care of you. But, you know, by and large, playing in churches isn't really the focus. And we really, honestly, it's it may be part the church's fault, but it's also part our fault because we just haven't focused on that. That hasn't been, you know, even if we could play churches, we know that by and large, that's not our target audience.
Well, with Christian heavy music as well, it's kind of a catch-22 because the bulk of the modern American church, you know, when it comes to, you know, approaching bands like taking the Head of Goliath or a Shamash or even Grave Robber, you know, they'll be like, oh well, you know, that type of music isn't really Christian. I've had a lot of arguments with people that I had a former pastor who would tell me that, because you can't understand the lyrics immediately, it's just evident that you cannot convert heavy metal to being Christian because the message isn't being understood. So you have that one.
Well, there's a lot of passages in the Bible that you can't understand the first time you read it.
And
do we dismiss that?
You're preaching to the choir here on that. Like I said, these are arguments I've had with people.
Right.
Whereas,
just because the pastor can't understand the words doesn't mean that you can't understand the words.
Whereas, then all of a sudden these Christian bands turn around, and so they have to play the bar scene, because the Christian circuit won't take them. And then they catch flack from the same churches saying, "Oh, look at this Christian band who's playing in a bar. Obviously, they're not really Christian." And I knew it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a catch-22. And it's like, and of course, I'm kind of jumping around your band a little bit because I don't want to interview, because we're not interviewing Wretched here, but Grave Robber, you guys catch it on the third level because there's people who don't understand the whole horror punk aspect, I guess.
Right.
Which,
Well, I mean, yeah, you probably need to ask Wretched about that. He can probably explain it better than I can. But as far as that, going into a bar and playing and catching the flack, Jesus did the same thing. I mean, right after Levi's conversion to Matthew, he goes to dinner with Matthew and all of his sinner friends at his house. Rabbis just don't do that. And who comes to call him out? The religious people, right? And the funny thing in that passage, if you read the passage in Matthew, is the Pharisees come out and they call the disciples over to question the disciples about why Jesus is doing what he's doing. And it's almost like, well, why don't you just ask him? And they kind of know better than to ask him because they know he's going to put them in their place. And he does. He sees what's going on. He comes out and pretty much, he says, the Son of Man comes eating and drinking, and you call him a glutton and a drunkard, meaning, I'm having a glass of wine with these guys. Yeah, I'm having dinner with these guys, but I'm neither a glutton nor a drunkard. And by calling himself the Son of Man, he's denoting his deityship. He's literally what he's saying is like, I am God. I am having a ham sandwich with these guys, and I am having a Bud Light. Chill out. That's essentially what he's saying. Like you guys are idiots. Like go find something worthwhile to put your attentions on. Because really what Jesus is doing there is pretty innocuous as far as Mosaic law goes, but it means everything to the people that are in that room, and so you apply the same thing to a Christian death metal band going and playing with a bunch of other death metal bands in a bar. Okay. That breaks, as far as I can tell, maybe I'm wrong and I'm open to being wrong, but as far as I can tell, I can't find a single New Testament passage that's being violated. Right. Not one. But I also find the Great Commission, which is being kept. So trying to call somebody out for literally following the words of Jesus and not breaking any of the commandments of Jesus, to me is just like, that is the most hypocritical thing that you can come up with to do, and so that it's crazy how I think if the churches would get behind these bands and understand that they're modern day evangelists. I mean, that's what they are. I mean, they are taking the gospel to places that the church either doesn't know exist or doesn't have the fortitude to go there. Your average. Now here's something interesting though. No joke. With Grave Robber, little old church ladies get it almost every time. It's very rare that we've ever had a little old church lady come up and try to condemn us. I mean, it's always like, I love what you guys do. I love the fact that you do it the way you do it. I love the fact that you go places where I can't go and tell people about Jesus. We hear that all the time from little old church ladies. You know who doesn't like Grave Robber? Youth group kids, because they might be new to faith. And so they're still in that legalistic phase. They've been told by other people that, well, if it doesn't look Christian, it probably isn't Christian. And which, of course, I always go back to John the Baptist. He probably didn't look very Christian. You know, he's a wild man. The chances of him having a comb, probably pretty slim. I doubt he had a toothbrush. He's wearing camel skin. The dude's, you know, they say you are what you eat, and this guy ate locusts. You know, I'm sure his appearance when he walks out of the wilderness is pretty horrifying. You know, he's not a normal looking dude.
For sure.
Right? But he's heralding the coming of Jesus Christ. I love that God chose this to be the method, you know, because that shows me that, you know, in 2021, somebody like Wretched can declare the king of the universe.
Yeah, well, for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's nothing wrong with having a difficult message to, you know, because it makes you think about things. Like I'm the youth pastor at my church, and you know, I encourage grave robber, to be perfectly honest. But
now, see, your youth group kids might be cool.
but I also,
you know,
I also push lust
seriously,
control on them too. So I mean,
there you go. Right. So I mean, they're gonna have a different viewpoint. When I say youth group kids,
no, but I understand
in every youth group in the nation. I mean that we let me put it this way: we played Sunshine Fest, which is hilarious. You know, so we played Cornerstone. You stand on stage, and it's just an ocean of black T-shirts. You know, there was like I think they said, what was it, 2,500 people in the tent the last time we headlined. So 2,500 people is a lot of people. So, but it's nothing but black T-shirts, right? And then a couple weeks later, we played Sunshine, and every youth group had their own color, like fluorescent green, orange, red, yellow, just bright blue. And all these youth group kids they all wear their color, the color of their, which is funny because that's like, you know, isn't that,
right,
don't gangs do that? They wear their colors. And so these youth group gangs are wearing, you know, fluorescent green and everything. And so you stand on the stage and look out over all these kids, and it looks like you're looking at a spilled bag of Skittles. That's what it looks like, because it's like all these different colors, like, and all huddled together. And so we played the show, and I thought everything went great. The kids seemed responsive. It seemed like everything was good. Everything was fine. And a couple weeks later, we got a message from Sunshine saying, "Hey, unfortunately, we can never book you guys again." Why? What did we do? And they shared they blocked out the names, of course, but they shared some messages that they had received from youth group kids about how we were not Christians and we're not this, we're not that, and all this stuff. And I was just like, wow, it was crazy. But I mean, I wasn't even mad, because I understand that's the culture and the environment that we stepped into.
It's a fashion thing. Cause I mean, if you actually sit down and listen to, you know, the lyrics, you know, yeah, they're painted with some imagery, obviously, for what the band is. But I mean, you listen to songs like Paranormal Activity or, you know, You're All Gonna Die. I mean, I got it right away. In fact, the first time I discovered the band, first thing I did was I messaged the band's website and I'm like, hey, you know, I just want to let you know, I think I get what you're doing and I think it's freaking brilliant. But I come from a background where, you know, I was listening to the Misfits at an early age. So
oh yeah,
horror punk's kind of my jam. So
what's really interesting about the Misfits is along the way, and this isn't even Grave Robber, this is long before Grave Robber.
Right.
I became friends with a guy named Bobby Steele, who was the guitar player right before Doyle.
Right.
Excuse me. And Bobby was not the original guitar player of the Misfits. He was in after Franchi Coma, and but he was in the Misfits the same length of time that Doyle was.
Right.
I'm talking originally before they broke up. And he did 3 7-inches with them, but Doyle did the album. So, to the bulk of the world, it's Doyle was the guy who was the guitar player in there the whole time. Anyway, fast forward, and now Bobby is a Christian. So he's written some Christian songs. He's absolutely a believer. He's just an absolutely fantastic human being. And I've also heard that that Jerry Only, who is Catholic, has become more serious about his faith over the years too. So, but then some of the songs don't seem. It seems weird that some of the song lyrics. I go, okay, that's kind of weird, But I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the Misfits. I have been since I was a kid.
Yeah, Jerry Only, actually, I found out about him in the What So and So Says section of HM Magazine, which I love. Yeah, I love that. But I guess both him and Doyle are, because they, after the post Misfits, they had put out an album under the band name Christ the Conqueror. And it was, I guess it was some sort of caveman themed band. So, and I've noticed, I've kind of noticed the difference in the lyricism between the Glenn Danzig era and the Michael Graves era of the Misfits. You had more songs that are just based off of movies rather than songs like Bullet or Where Eagles Dare.
Right. Now, Michael Graves claims to be a Christian as well. So
yeah, I love him.
It's interesting that there's and there's a lot of dudes in the music business. I mean, I remember being at Cornerstone and they did this. I just happened to be there. I was really lucky. They were doing what do you call it? I guess it was just like an interview, but it was more or less like a press conference with Dan Spitz from Anthrax.
Right.
And he had Peter Baltus, the bass player from Accept, with him. And they were announcing this new band they were putting together with this drummer. They couldn't name the drummer yet. Well, the drummer, I found out years later, was Nico McBrain.
Oh.
And the whole thing never happened. It never came together. But Danny's a Christian for sure. I've talked to him. He is. And there's a lot of those guys out there. And I know
Nico is.
The one that's most confused. I'm sorry?
Nico. I said, I know that Nico McBrain is.
Yeah. Yeah, he is for sure. But it's interesting, like within the secular music scene, there's a number of Christians in there. Of course, Blackie Lawless, Alice Cooper, the Daves from Megadeth, although the one Dave, we don't need to talk about that. Got a little bit of trouble this year. But you know what, man, he did something that was pretty horrible, but the Bible says there's only one sin that's not forgivable. And, as long as he repents and as long as he gets his act together, I think his fans and his audience will get past it, and he'll get past it as long as he truly repents.
I mean,
he'll be all right.
If As I Lay Dying can forgive Tim Lambesis,
Yeah. I think the important thing in that is that Tim forgives himself.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I just saw some lyrics that on a recent thing that he did. I guess does he have a new band or something?
Oh no, As I Lay Dying is back together with him.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, the person who posted these lyrics said a different name. Maybe they got it wrong. I don't know. But the lyrics were really good and really faith-based and really good. So hopefully that's where he finds himself. And I know some people out in California that actually know him. And even though he doesn't go public very strongly about anything, they say, in private and in person that he's definitely repented and he's definitely, has sorrow for what he's done, and he's made amends with his ex-wife and everything's good. But, it sounds like to me that the reason he doesn't go public is people have already tried and condemned him.
Yeah.
There's nothing more to say.
Right.
They're not going to believe him. They don't want to believe him. Yeah. And it's unfortunate within Christendom that when things like unfortunate things like that happen, when people respond to the flesh rather than walking in the spirit, when people do that, especially if they're a public figure, there's no forgiveness.
Yeah.
There's no recompense. You can't work past it. You are condemned from here to eternity. And that's all there is to it in the eyes of some people.
Yeah.
Now, of course, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've heard a pastor say one time that the Christian army is the only army that will shoot their wounded.
Absolutely. And then shoot themselves in the foot at the same time. It's almost like, yeah, I've heard that quote too, that we're the only army that shoots our wounded. But I would add that we shoot our wounded through our own feet. Because when you shoot your wounded, you're harming your own ministry. because you're not doing what you say you're doing. And Jesus had this word for that, for saying one thing and doing the other. He had this word for it, hypocrite. You know, and we wonder, why does the world not fill up our churches? Why aren't our pews and our, why aren't our churches filled to the gills every Sunday? Well, because you shoot your wounded through your own foot. Maybe you should stop doing that. Yeah. We had a conversation my wife and I did the other day about this guy that we know who is gay and is involved in our church. And she goes, I've noticed there's been a lot of changes in him. I said, yeah, there has, So a lot of churches would say, you can't even take part in what we have going on here because you're gay. What I would say is, whatever sin, and I don't even know, okay, this is going to go into dangerous territory here. Okay. What I read in the New Testament talks about the physical act of what gay men do as the sin. So if somebody is gay but doesn't engage in that, in other words, if you have homosexual tendencies but you don't do that, are you still sinning? That's a tough question. Okay, I don't want to try to answer that question right here. But I will say this. This gay man that I'm talking about does not have a boyfriend. Okay? Attends our church, helps out, always willing to dig in at any time, tithes, raises his hands in worship. He's attentive. He helps. What do we do? Do we kick him out because he's gay? Or do we let him stay and hear the word of God and let the word of God transform him? Let the Holy Spirit transform him. Let the Holy Spirit do better than what I can do. If I'm wrong, I don't think that my missing the mark here would be nearly as damaging as throwing this guy out and saying you're not welcome here because of that, and then finding out I'm wrong about that.
Well, and
if I'm
and then the Bible also says, it's the goodness of God that draws men to repentance. Showing people God, any sort of wrath or anything to that effect. You're not going to change the world by kicking people out.
Right. I had a really good friend named Skip Brooks, who was a pastor of a church down in San Antonio, and he passed 3 years ago. I remember we were on tour and visiting his church, and we actually played a show in his church. Now, this was like a punk rock church in San Antonio, Texas. So the youth group kids there had no problem with us. And, and there was a guy who walked in the door wearing a dress, had earrings, had a wig on, had makeup on. And now this was around Halloween time. So naturally, I thought it was a Halloween costume. And I mentioned something to Skip about that. And Skip goes, oh, no, he dresses like that all the time. Okay. All right. And 2 years later, same thing. We were down there. It was around Halloween time. This guy walks in with a cowboy hat. No, it's Texas. Walks in with a cowboy hat, cowboy boots on. And Skip leans over to me. He goes, remember the guy in the dress? I said, yeah. He goes, that's him. Wow, that's a switch, man. Now he's like, went from dressing like a grandma to dressing like John Wayne.
Hey.
He said, yeah. He said, this guy had really, really bad emotional problems because his mother died. And when she died, he started going into her closet and wearing her clothes. It was something psychological that just kind of snapped in him. He said, instead of kicking him out, instead of throwing him away, we just let him be who he was and let God work on him. He said one day he walked in dressed in a suit and tie, and we were like, wow, what happened to you? He goes, oh, I just realized I don't need to wear my mom's dresses anymore because doing that's not going to bring her back, and her memories in my head, not in wearing her clothes. And so now this guy wasn't necessarily gay, but most people would probably say he was a cross-dresser.
Right.
And so 2 years after that, we were back down there again, and he walked in wearing a full Indian headdress.
All right, then.
And I said, okay, so, all right, Skip, is this an improvement? He went from wearing his mom's dresses to dressing like John Wayne. Now he's a cowboy. He goes, well, he just found out that he is a Native American, and so now he's embracing that. And I'm like, okay, but see, this guy's working it out. This guy's in church. He's hearing the word of God. He's figuring it out. Most of us figure it out in not such a dramatic way, but some of us have to take time, And so when it comes to Tim Lambesis, or it comes to Michael Graves, or it comes to, anybody. It comes to you and I. It's like the person that I am today is far different than the person I was 22 years ago when I said yes to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Very different person, very different person than, before Jesus. So those things just take time, and that Galatians 5:22 and 23, it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those 9, it says the fruit, not the fruits,
Mm-hmm.
the fruit, one fruit that has all 9 components. And if you kind of take inventory every now and then and go, okay, am I love, joy, peace? Let's take the first 3. Am I more loving now than I was then? Yeah. Because you know what? 21 years ago, I might have kicked the cross-dressing guy out.
Right.
So it's a good thing I wasn't a pastor back then,
Right.
But I wouldn't have wanted him around. Oh, look what's going on with that guy. Fully not looking at what's going on with this, fully not looking at what's going on with this guy.
Right.
What's going on with that guy. And that is one of the worst things that we can do as Christians, is to get our focuses on other people's sin and how they need to straighten up.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm okay. So yeah, a lot more loving. Joy. Yeah. Joy's not happiness. Joy's a deep rooted thing. I mean, when things go sour with me, yeah, it's a bummer, but the bottom doesn't completely drop out.
Right.
It used to.
Yeah.
But then I had moments of happiness, but then the bottom would drop out. Now with joy, the bottom doesn't drop out, right? Peace. When those bad things happen, I can deal with it much better than I used to be able to deal with it when I was younger. So those things naturally are growing in me,
Mm-hmm.
as well as every other person who says yes to Jesus and allows the Holy Spirit to do that work. So that's why I say, the people that are in the bars, the people that are outside of the 4 walls of the church, I really don't have a whole lot of judgment for them. I can't even muster it. Now, Christians inside the church that claim Jesus and then live their lives like they're going out of their way to reject him. Yeah, I can, what's that? Is it John 7? I can't remember now.
Mm.
But talks about how we judge people. In the manner that you judge, you will be judged, right?
Mm.
It didn't say you're not going to judge. It says in the manner that you judge, right? And I think we get that wrong as Christians. You're not supposed to judge your brother. You're not supposed. Yeah, you are. You are now, not judge with condemnation, but judge with assessment.
Right.
If I'm not assessing what's going on with you, and we're in the same church, and I'm not looking at what you're doing and assessing it, that means I don't care about you. I don't give a rip about you.
Mm-hmm.
I should be looking at John and going, man, I hope John's okay. He's kind of being a little weird lately. He's being a little squirrely. I wonder what's going on with him. That is an assessment, which is a judgment, right? I'm making a judgment. Something's going on. And then I can come to you and go, hey, I've noticed there's a couple of things have been going on. Is everything okay?
Right.
And if not, how can I walk alongside you and help? That's a judgment, but that's not a condemnation. Judgment of condemnation is never allowed in a Christian's life.
And I've left churches because they don't do that. Like,
yeah,
there was one church I went to where I went there for 3 years. I still had no clue who any of the people were there. No one had an interest in knowing me or trying to have a relationship with me. They absolutely wanted me to play guitar up on the worship team, but so I decided to test it one day after 3 years when I was feeling incredibly lonely going to this church.
Yeah.
And so I didn't go to church for 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I didn't go to church. And, they would schedule me for the worship team and I wouldn't show up. And then 6 weeks later, I showed up and no one said, I noticed you were missing. What's going on? It was just like, I think one person said, hey, John, and that was it.
Wow.
And I'm just like, I need to leave this. This is not a healthy atmosphere.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry to say, if you were on the worship team, they should have been calling you about 15 minutes after it was time to be there. It's time for rehearsal or sound check. Well, where's John? Should have been calling you right there. Yeah.
But
a part of it, I will blame. I gotta be careful how I say this. part of it I blame on our culture. Our culture at large right now is a leave me alone, don't tell me what to do, don't get in my business type culture, and that has bled into the church. It shouldn't, but it has, so it's like if you don't show up, the mindset in many cases is, oh, I shouldn't bother him. He's obviously something's going on. I better leave him alone. Okay. Well, that's a cultural thing, but it's not a biblical thing. The biblical thing is you go find out what's going on. I don't think that the pastor has to chase every person who leaves the church, but I do think the church has a responsibility to just check in on with the people that they're closest to, like, I don't know, like, on the worship team, it seems to me that if you're on the worship team, somebody on the worship team should have been the one to check in on you, and I don't mean that condemning. I just mean, it's just an odd thing that we have, 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't like this. I mean, if you didn't show up, people were panicking, like, what's going on? Why is he not here today? And now it's just like, oh, we can't get in anybody's business. Gotta let them go.
Sure.
So it's just a weird thing that we have. I live in a subdivision, and I don't really know my neighbors. 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't like that. Everybody knew everybody.
Yeah. Well, to be perfectly honest, I'm not super familiar with any of mine either. So I get where you're coming from, but it's like you said, it shouldn't be that way in the church, even if it is that way outside of the four walls. So, because the church should be more like a family and less like a club. So,
yeah, absolutely. Now our church is really tiny, 12 to 15 of us on our best day, so it's kind of hard. You can't hide.
Yeah, for sure.
You can't sit back in the shadows, and there's too few people. You can't get away with
for
that.
Sure. Well, bringing it back to Rottweiler here. What is the future of Rottweiler? I got a recommendation for you have a sub label now that has 4 bands on it, and 2 of which I'm already planning on buying all their stuff. So that's a thing. Do you intend on creating a hip hop sub label of Rottweiler?
Well, this is interesting. So Haggah Recordings was a hip hop label.
Oh, really?
And I don't know why I got it in my head that I should do that, but I did. And what I found out really quickly was that hip hop subculture was something I don't know a whole lot about, and not that I couldn't have learned it or brought somebody on that did know about it, but it was really interesting that a lot of hip hop that was current and modern, like the stuff that I remember, because I'm older, for me it was like, Run DMC and NWA and Public Enemy, but that's like old school stuff, Cool Mo D and all that. So that's like old school hip hop. Part of me actually kind of likes it. Part of me is like, it's just, I got this, what's the right word? I guess nostalgia for it. And so I kind of like it. Then there was this whole, right at that time, this whole thing that was coming in with like mumble rap. And the mumble rap was like, I could understand every word. It wasn't that I had, thank you. It wasn't like I had trouble understanding the words. My problem with mumble rap was I just thought it was really boring.
I agree so much.
It didn't say anything. So the mumble rap to me was just boring. Like, I remember the first time I heard NWA, and I'm like, this is like the equivalent of metal to hip hop, right? Because it just sounded heavy and it sounded hard, and the drum beats were thick and just hard hitting. The production on that Straight Outta Compton record is just really hard hitting and just really, actually the production's pretty cool. And I remember hearing that and hearing some of the Ice-T stuff. The Girl Tried to Kill Me has this big rock guitar thing on it. So I heard that and I was like, so that stuff, I went, okay. At the time, back in the 80s, I was like, I hate rap. And then I heard this stuff and I went, no, I actually kind of like this. This is all right. And I don't dislike it. So I didn't follow into the whole gangster rap. Like, honestly, this is blasphemy in the rap world, but Snoop was kind of boring for me because his delivery was so laid back. And I guess that was the appeal, was that he's laid back and smooth and cool. And, and hip.
Mhm.
I didn't want that. I wanted the straight out of Compton. You're like, rah! You know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
getting angry.
Public Enemy, man.
yeah, 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 yeah. You know, face, how low can you go? Death row.
What a brother, no.
You know, yeah, and I wanted that, you know, and so it went from the gangster rap, then you know we move on into the, you know, now through all the different styles and whatnot, and we land on mumble rap. Mumble rap was just like this one tone with a beat, it was like slow. It's like, but not even. I can't even compare it to doom metal. Like it was just like. I don't know. It was just super duper slow. He's like, he's rapping like somebody told him, okay, when you go into the vocal booth, don't move your tongue, your teeth, or your lips, and do your rap that way. You know, and that's what it sounded like to me. And so there was all this, and it was super popular at the time when Haga was trying to be a rap label. And I signed one artist. I listened to a bunch of stuff, but the stuff that was coming my way was kind of old school. And then I'd play it for some people who really were into rap. I go, what do you think of this? And they go, that sounds like it came out in 1988. I'm like, yeah. Isn't it cool? No, it's not. Okay. Because rap is about being very current and very on top and very modern and, you know, very up on it. We've got bands on Rottweiler that sound like they came out of 1992, 1998. You know, we've got some old sounding bands. I mean, let's be real. Taking the Head of Goliath sounds like they're from the early mid 90s.
Yeah, from the Florida death metal scene. I get it.
Exactly. So they sound like that, which is the reason I like them. You know, and the reason they like doing what they do because they like this style of music. Grave Robber sounds like 70s punk rock with a little more modern production.
Mm-hmm.
Not super modern, but you know what I mean. And so those kind of sounds, Brutality sounds like late 90s thrash or mid 90s thrash or whatever. And so anyway, the hip hop thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called Haga, and I signed one artist. I signed Dirt, and he had this record. Oh, dude, and the record was so good. Well, at one point, I realized that I could not really facilitate Dirt the way I wanted to, and like I'm doing this guy no justice at all. So I went to him and I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm giving everything back, and I'm folding the label. It's done." Well, then, man, it was just like one of those Holy Spirit things. A few years later, I left the page up. I don't even know why, but a few years later, all of a sudden it was like the Lord telling me, like, "Hey, look, there's all these bands out there." I couple rules. One was I wouldn't sign a single artist project band. I wouldn't do it. I wanted to sign bands, or not. I wanted to sign bands. It was God directing me to sign bands. Well, I kept getting these demos. It's just one guy, but the music was decent. So I'm like, maybe that's what Haga was supposed to be. Maybe Haga is supposed to be this underground metal label, like even further underground than what Rottweiler is, you know? I got to look this up real quick. I got my computer and I'm going to tell you this really quick. Okay. So I decided that it was going to be a like death metal, black metal, that kind of thing, you know, go a little harder, make Rottweiler a little more, I hate to say the word mainstream or to say, commercial, because I don't think our bands are really all that commercial. I mean, there's not like a, you know, Nickelback or, you know, that type of sound. It's not a radio sound at all, but it's not. Rottweiler has a little bit of a polish. The bands have a little bit of a polish to them, whereas Haga is like just dirty, nasty, whatever. And, but it's good. I love that kind of music though. You know, like that early like Creator albums back in the late 80s, you know, so nasty sounding. But that's what I loved about it. You know, and like bands like the Crumbsuckers were like one of my favorites, you know, for crossover thrash and some of the DRI stuff when I was younger. But Haga, I understood that word because there is that verse that says that we're to dwell on these things, you know, whatever is good, whatever is, you know, righteous, whatever, you know, we're to dwell on these things. Okay. The word dwell in Hebrew is Haggah, and that means to mutter to oneself. So if you're muttering to yourself things that are good, righteous, holy, pleasing, all of that, if you are muttering that to yourself, what are you doing? You're preaching to yourself. You're telling yourself. Now, in the context of that verse, it's talking about God. Remind yourself of the goodness of God. Remind yourself of the holiness of God. Remind yourself of his righteousness. Okay. So you're reminding yourself of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But also it works for you yourself. So, if you're down in the doldrums and, remind yourself of who you are, who your identity is in, like identity in Christ, not identity in the world, not identity in your failures, not identity in your flaws, identity in Christ. Not beating yourself up because you happen to sin. If your sin is already paid for and taken care of by the cross, you can't dwell in that. You can't live in that, but you can Haggah to yourself and say, my identity is now in Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:17, I'm a new creature because I'm in Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like it's a passage to tell you to remind yourself of the goodness of God and to remind yourself to tell yourself to remind yourself about your identity in Christ. Okay. That was the intention for the hip hop label. Haggah, to speak,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's hip hop?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Rhythmic speaking.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, I'm the singer in a hip hop band. No, you're the rhythmic speaker in a hip hop band.
Right.
You're not, that's not singing. It's rhythmic talking, right? And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that to explain this name. Now, check this out. This blew my mind, right? So I'm like, yeah, but Haggah doesn't really work. It doesn't work for a black metal label. So I looked up the meaning for Haggah in the Old Testament Hebrew lexicon, and I'm pulling it up right now. You ready for this?
Uh-huh.
To moan, growl, utter, muse, mutter, meditate, devise, plot, or speak. But it's...
Hey everybody, this is John cutting in, future John that is. It was at this point that the file on Shawn's track corrupted, so you were to only get one side of the conversation, my side, if this were to continue. Glicks caused problems with the file retrieval process, and thus part of the interview was destroyed. Unfortunately, it was the last 12 minutes. I apologize for the inconvenience, but this interview was really good, and Shawn was such a good guy to give us the interview that I wanted to put what we had out. And he said he would definitely be back on the show. So we are thankful for that, and hopefully you've enjoyed this episode of Primitive Rhythm Machine. And once again, Primitive Rhythm Machine is part of the Geek Devotion Network. It is a network devoted to letting you know that you are loved and there is a purpose for your life. So if you get nothing else out of this episode, we want to make sure that you hear that. I have a few ideas coming up. Steve will be returning for an episode. We're going to talk about some stuff, so stay tuned for that. And so we'll catch you next time. Peace and love.